In chapter 33, we get another party. The party in the previous chapter, 32, was at the Vanderleutens, the elder peak of New York society. And in 33, we get Newland and May offering up their first formal dinner party engagement. And there's much fuss about this, but there's the connection, the parallelism between these two parties, I think, is significant. It isn't commented on in the narration, but the idea that one party exists and the other party exists, and without a comment, you're forced to speculate a little bit more on the connection between the two. And quite frankly, it suggests to me the absorption of the younger couple into that rarefied sphere of the older couple. It suggests also that Newland, if he is culled into this society with all the doubts and reservations that we know he has, it seems plausible that maybe others are as well. Maybe the placid unity that we see throughout this culture is a bit more fractured than we might think. Maybe Newland isn't quite the outlier that he might otherwise appear to be. That one little but that one little technique of just keeping these two parties so conspicuously together, one chapter and then another, invites all of this speculation. That's the friction of the parallel. It creates opportunities for meaning. The discussion of the planning goes on for quite a while. There's more opportunity for Wharton to showcase her signature lifestyle porn of the rich and famous, and it's you can see how the masses, she was interested in selling books, you can see how the masses would just gobble this stuff up. It's like, ooh, wow, this is fancy stuff. This is how the other, 1% lives. It does have that somewhat lurid, noses against the glass quality, like so much else in this book. But also she injects a curious note of metafiction again into that moment when she writes, "It was always an interesting occasion when a young pair launched their first invitations in the third person." Now, that is a reference to the somewhat arch way that formal engraved invitations go out. Mr. and Mrs. Newland Archer cordially invite you to that third person. Instead of saying, "Hey, we would like you to come," which is first person, they're saying the third person, Newland Archer and whatever. And that curious formality of it is an oddity of that culture, a convention of that culture. But it's also, I think, significant that it is a grammatical turn, that it is an element, a tactic of grammar, of language, of rhetoric. That this is offered up. So it gets you thinking immediately. And this is right at the beginning of the chapter, it gets you thinking immediately of, okay, there's something artificial about this. This is artifice. This is writing. It is an odd little metafictional turn. Third person is naturally an alienating grammatical device. It allows you to abstract the people themselves. It allows you to abstract yourself, in this case, into something else. This isn't somebody else sending the invitations on Newland and May's part. It's them sending it as an abstraction of themselves, a third person other than themselves, which gives you that same out-of-body thing that we've been flirting with throughout, but also suggests, again, the surface of it, how that is an entirely different reality than something authentic within. The artifice is in many ways the more important aspect of social life in New York at the time. The specificity of the setting is again made very curiously explicit, another technique of realism. 10 days had passed since Madame Olenska's departure from New York. We're told this very specifically. And it seems to be, the novel seems to be, at this point, nailing these little moments in when it's not necessarily critical information. You get the sense that, well, okay, it's around the same time. Maybe it's preparing you for the final chapter. I don't know. Maybe, however, it's just trying to wrestle the abstraction, the natural modernist tendencies of these later chapters into submission. Which I think we've seen again and again, that struggle between the modernist and the realist modes of aesthetics. And Wharton seems to be calibrating the two to always be struggling. But the realism is, I would say, rather predominant in many ways. You see this in the busyness of the plot itself, the details of Olenska's fate. Are dominating this party. And the whole period around it. We can read that that theme of misinterpretation also comes in when we see, during those 10 days, Archer had had no sign from her but that conveyed by the return of a key wrapped in tissue paper and sent to his office in a sealed envelope addressed in her hand. This retort to his last appeal might have been interpreted as a classic move in a familiar game, but the young man chose to give it a different meaning. She was still fighting against her fate, but she was going to Europe, and she was not returning to her husband. Nothing, therefore, was to prevent his following her, and once he had taken the irrevocable step and had proved to her that it was irrevocable, he believed she would not send him away. He is interpreting. He is, in many cases, misinterpreting. He is trying to draw meaning out of signs, that clear word there. Signs, or we're in the land of semiotics at this point. That is, what is she going to do? How is this going to end? Is Archer going to be able to break free of his marriage? Is he going to be reunited with his one true love? All of these plotty elements are churning right now and drawing the reader along. But it seems like such it seems like such nonsense. It seems so silly. The soap opera melodrama of the plot is just chugging along, and Newland himself is sort of walking through it a little bit in a fantasy. Now, part of that is his own romantic predisposition towards wanting to escape it all. But there seems something quite alienated about him in this. There seems something quite abstract from it. He is looking at it all as very false and very bizarre. But the plot itself is just sort of churning along, and it's as if the real interest, the real core meaning of the novel is with him and his kind of existential angst, more than just, the machinations of whether or not the lovers will get together and New York society will go on or whatever. When Archer questions the details of Olenska's deal with her husband, when he has been called in as the attorney and he's working it out with the senior partner, Letterblair, he questions the deal, and Letterblair is just rather put out by the suggestion that they could do better and that they would do better. And his position is much more that, well, she's lucky for anything she's got, even though Archer is pointing out that, well, this was all her money to begin with, and now we're supposed to be grateful that her husband is giving it back to her, or giving some back to her. So there's a clear little jab at sexism going on here from Wharton and her own proto-feminist sensibilities. But that little exchange is, again, rather interesting because of Letterblair's response. It comes in kind of halting cliches, these broken phrases that don't really mean anything. He says, "My dear sir, I've no wish to extenuate the Count's transgressions, but on the other side, I wouldn't put my hand in the fire. Well, that there hadn't been fit tit for tat, and the young champion." Mr. Letterblair unlocked the drawer and pushed the folded paper towards Archer. "This report, the result of discreet inquiries." This notion of just language being emitted that has no meaning. It is completely bereft of any meaning. And the emphasis at the end that that extends to print as well. All of this language is just language, and it is nothing. What is really significant is what is between the lines, beyond the lines. Something more important is happening in an immaterial realm that the language cannot encapsulate. But at the party itself, Archer's perspective is drawn into question as is at his first sight of Olenska, looking, quote, "excessively pale, and her pallor made her dark hair seem even denser and heavier than ever. Also, the amber beads she was wearing were trying to her complexion, or her dress was perhaps unbecoming. Her face looked lusterless and almost ugly, and he had never loved it as he did at that minute." Now, you can see that a couple of different ways. Number one, we've been told a couple of times that he has a difficult time remembering what she looks like. Remember how when he went to go meet her in Jersey City, he just couldn't quite remember what she looked like. They really haven't spent that much time together for him to be even contemplating this massive change in his life. But the physical presence of her is always somewhat of a mystery to him, or in some cases repugnant to him. Remember the horror at her at her sexuality that we see in the opening scene. The idea that he was disturbed and agitated by her showing some shoulder skin or something like that. That is a curious thing. Now, you can also read that, of course, as well. He loved her despite the fact that she wasn't perhaps looking her best. She is going through a difficult time. She's about to move. That's very stressful. You can appreciate that maybe she didn't really take the full time to tidy up afterwards, and perhaps the stress is starting to show. But so he loves her in spite of that. But I think that's significant because he is in love with a kind of image of her. He is in love with a kind of abstraction of her rather than the physical being. Now, you can go with that a number of different ways. That is, of course, the body, and we all do age. So you want somebody to love you for who you are on the inside and all of that. And I think that meaning is here. But the suggestion that he is not necessarily in love with herself, but rather an abstraction of her, I think is significant and will become more significant in the final chapter. There is a clear division, again, the reminder between the physical and the spiritual, between the physical and the abstract. All of this is churning around in there for us to make hay with. But when they're in the party and he is told that he has to formally escort Ellen into the party, into the living room or something like that. He goes and she puts her arm around his or in his or whatever, and we are told that it is a contrast again to the earlier part of the novel when he saw her perhaps in a different light, and so we're holding these two time periods again, these two frames of reference in our mind simultaneously, and they're being held up again next to one another, again in parallel, again in an obvious contrast. But we are meant to draw out, there's no explicit connection really made on this grounds, but we are meant to draw connections from it, draw meaning from that parallelism. When we read, Madame Olenska put her hand on his arm, and he noticed that the hand was ungloved, and remembered how he had kept his eyes fixed on it the evening that he had sat with her in the little 23rd Street drawing room. Archer's perspective is further complicated as it comes to see the party from an alienated position. He almost has an out-of-body experience. He gets a perspective more of a witness than a participant, which I think is very key to his character. Archer, who seemed to be assisting at the scene in a state of odd imponderability, as if he floated somewhere between chandelier and ceiling, wondering at nothing so much as his own share in the proceedings. As his glance traveled from one placid, well-fed face to another, he saw all the harmless-looking people engaged upon May's canvas backs as a band of dumb conspirators, and himself and the pale woman on his right as the center of their conspiracy. And then it came over him, in a vast flash made up of many broken gleams, that to all of them he and Madame Olenska were lovers. Significant point of recognition here, interesting on a lot of levels. He is sort of abstracting, and now he's always been sort of aloof and in his own thoughts, very conspicuously during his internal monologue of the first half of the book. But now he's having another thing where we're not really, his thoughts aren't narrated in the stream of consciousness mode, where we got much closer to that in that first half of the book. But now it's now it's oddly calm. Now it's oddly surreal. He's just going through and he realizes, oh yeah, they all seem to know that I'm in love with her. And they all seem to perhaps misinterpret that we are physically intimate as well. And yet everybody is just going on. Nobody's saying anything. Everybody is just pretending it wasn't so, even though they know it. So it is the subtext rather than the text that has meaning. The text itself, the surface, the words that they say to one another in the party, the polite smiles that they all exchange are all just meaningless. But it is the subtext. It is the embedded intuitions within the text that have the real meaning, that are authentic. And he is just starting to realize this. He is starting to see it in them. They have been seeing it in him and Olenska. They have been misinterpreting it. Maybe Archer is misinterpreting this. We're never really given any confirmation of this. He doesn't know, and he can't know. Again, significant. And that phrase, a vast flash made up of many broken gleams, that sense of brokenness, that sense of fragment is so modernistic. Just think of Picasso and Braque. that sense of reality is never really a coherent whole, but only just shards of perception that we piece together in our minds into something other than what we can actually see, something perhaps more, usually less, but we are all working from imperfect perception. This is very significant stuff that he's dealing with. After the dinner, the men, of course, retire to the library where they can do manly things and smoke cigars. Archer listens to Lawrence Lefferts, who is going on and on about the moral outrage of Ellen's actions, and of course the moral turpitude at loose in New York society. You know, kids today are just being so corrupt, and it's the form of the discussion itself is, again, oddly disconnected from its content, and Archer's estrangement from the reality of the situation is continually stressed. The talk swept past Archer like some senseless river running and running because it did not know enough to stop. That image of time as a river rushing past senselessly is repeated just a little bit later. We're told that on and so the evening swept on, running and running like a senseless river that did not know how to stop. Curiously, it's the same image, the same phrasing, senseless river, running, that is just repeated. This might seem like, well, maybe Wharton was just running out of ideas and she's just, copying herself. Or maybe she had forgotten that she had written it that way and the editor let it slip by. That's BS. What's significant there is that the writer is reminding us all that this is all language and all the words mean nothing. All the words are kind of empty. They are all just so much cliches and repetitions, and the language itself is calling attention to itself, and it is repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating. And the repetition points out how hollow it all is. The observation and the narration all become more strange with the repeating, all become estranged with the repeating. This is classic Russian formalism. This is the idea that it is art's job to make reality, objective, observable reality, somehow peculiar, so that you look at it twice and start to see it for the first time, rather than taking everything just at face value as like, oh yeah, I know what that is. Oh yeah, I know what that is. The ability to look at something you've seen 1,000 times and suddenly see it in a different light, not necessarily for what it is, but for what it is right then. And that is another core element of modernism that's creeping into this novel. Just one little step at a time. At the end of the evening, everybody's leaving. The very moralistic Lefferts, who was in such high dudgeon just a little while earlier, on his way out, just sort of whispers to Archer to cover for him, because just let it be known that you and I are having dinner tomorrow night. We're going to be at the club. Just let everybody sort of know that. He clearly has other plans for the next evening, and you can just imagine what they are, that he doesn't want all of his family and friends and wife to know about. It's the hypocrisy is more than just a little funny. It is another emphasis on the hollowness of language and his performativity of outrage in the library just a little earlier is just pure emptiness, just pure BS. At that same moment, or just a little bit later, Olenska leaves and says goodbye to Archer, and it's really their last time meeting, and it is marked again by a kind of misunderstanding, the misinterpretation of words. He says I'll see you soon in Paris. He has been floating this idea of doing some traveling, and he says that kind of conspicuously loud. And she just sort of turns to him and says, "Oh well, if you and May ... Again, the emptiness of the language, the fraction of the language, the fractured nature of the language, all implying or all demanding some interpretation, and coming up short. And both of them are sort of misunderstanding. Now, we know what Archer is saying. We don't necessarily know where she is coming from. We don't necessarily know if she really means for him and May to stop in and visit, and we'll go to dinner and do all of that stuff. We're not really privy to her thoughts. She remains an enigma throughout. But the important thing there is that it is another instance of misinterpretation. Is another instance of not quite getting what another person is saying. Their talk, like all talk, is just dead. It fails the test of authentic communication. And then Archer and May, everybody's left. They're tired. May feels a little triumphant that they had such a good dinner party. Perhaps she's triumphant in other ways and feeling it. Archer tries to talk to her again about his plans. He claims to be exhausted and frustrated, and she says, "Oh, have you been overworked?" Which recalls the earlier chunk of the novel where where we are told that the very lackadaisical schedule that gentlemen lawyers kept in those days, not anymore. The easy jobs that they have were somehow even then still too taxing. So that's a little callback right there, which again parallels the past and the present, collapses them. But he says, no. I think I need a trip. I need to go travel. I need to just get out of here for a little while. And he name checks India and Japan as destinations where he wants to go. And this is another sign, perhaps, of the extremity that he is feeling, the exoticism that he is seeking, the high romantic distance. But May shoots down his plans for foreign travel pretty quickly. As far as that, but I'm afraid you can't, dear, she said in an unsteady voice. Not unless you'll take me with you. Which comes almost as a threat, I would say. And she is suddenly, when she is supposed to be the docile and passive and accepting and totally powerless little girl, she's calling the shots here. She is stepping into the authoritative position. She is the clear embodiment of New York society now. She is running the show. And he is just kind of powerless within that. But she has a reason here, and she lets it be known that she is pregnant. She does not say that word, of course. Euphemism and discretion usually prevented such language from being used in polite writing and polite conversation in those polite circles. But you can see the connection to, again, that sense of language being rather performative, of language itself being rather plastic and superficial and empty of the real meaning. The real meaning needs to be extracted from beyond the language. The delicacy of the moment is so arch, and it codes her again as very much as a very proper lady, as a very proper society figure, even though at this moment she is essentially sticking a shiv in his rib cage and twisting it and letting him know that he has no power, because she knows that he cannot leave a pregnant wife. Marriages can be dissolved, there will be a scandal, there will be this, but she knows that he would not do that. He is essentially a very conservative figure in himself. He is essentially a very moralistic figure himself. He is essentially a creature of this world, very much himself, as well as May. And he won't do that. He won't just leave that. And he knows that if he did, that would dog him forever. He could go, he's not going to go live in a garret in Paris and, be a bohemian. He's looking to live the life of a gentleman of leisure in exile, where whispers go on, in private. But again, on the surface, everybody's going to be just sort of smiling and welcoming to him. And he knows that if there was a scandal involving a child, it wouldn't necessarily be that welcoming. The May's announcement to Ellen, suggests as well that same issue, where we are told that she actually, we're told that she announced to Ellen earlier, confided to Ellen a couple weeks earlier. Now, again, the times and the social class are all significant here, as they are in realism. But the implication that it would be a couple of weeks before that she would tell Ellen, with whom she has not been particularly close, even though they pretend to be close cousins. The fact that she would tell Ellen clearly invites other speculation, another instance of us being drawn into the act of making meaning ourselves rather than having the novel provide it for us. The implication is that she told Ellen that she was pregnant perhaps before she even knew she was, and as a way of torpedoing any plans that might be being hatched. She knows what her husband and Ellen have been doing. She, just like society itself, and we're told during the dinner party that she was part of that, she knows everything about it, and she has been strategizing how to bring these two under control. It completes her transformation into an emblem of society. It shows her to be almost menacing in her control, in her dominance of Archer, and her insistence on squelching out whatever independence or dreams that he might be harboring, any romantic flourishes that he might have in his heart still are now going to be destroyed. Archer had always thought that, well, that's May. He'd always been a little condescending to her. He'd always been a little bit, polite to her. It's like, yeah, that's May. She's just a little girl. What really draws him to Olenska is her experience, her worldliness, her intelligence, her sense of being a full person. But here, where he had always looked at May as just sort of a surface, polite, nice little girl to be arm candy for him in society, a helpful, performative co-star, if you will, in the life of the Newland Archers. He recognizes now that his presupposition of his own superiority to her was also all an illusion, also all fake. The reality of it, the truth of it, was something beneath the surface. And this is his tragedy, his ensnarement at this moment, recognizing that now even May, but in a way always May, have him locked in with no freedom whatever. Archer's ensnarement is complete.